pop in windows out. So today we are going to do a bit of a build breakdown on this car. So this is my LS3 Miata. Competition drift car is really what it is at this point, slash, you know, normal drift car. I've had this car for a while now. I've been building it really for like 3 years straight. So, you know, I built it originally the first time, and then that was, you know, what I considered V1, and then we kind of came into V2 shortly after that because I rod knocked the first motor. First time drifting it. That was pretty rough. Went through, made some revisions to try to ensure that did not happen again. And I drove it like that for a while, like quite a long time, probably at least a year, year and a half, maybe even 2 full years, making small changes along the way. Then we came into kind of version 2.5 where we put a bigger motor in it, and then since then, it's probably at version 2.8 now. You know, made small changes along the way. So it's been a drawn-out build in the sense that the car is not the same as it was when I finished building it 2+ years ago. So I figured it'd be good to go through the whole build as it sits right now, fresh off of managing to win clutch kickers. Gotten the car to the point that it was able to win there. If you're unfamiliar with clutch kickers, it is a very tough drifting competition. Big field of drivers, Pro 1 drivers, Pro 1 cars, very, very fast cars, very, very good drivers. It is incredibly hard to win there, both car-wise and driving-wise, right? So the fact that we were able to get the car to the point to win there on merit too, you know, it's not like we lucked into it by big mistakes from other drivers or their car failing or things like that. Like, we really only had one hand-me battle out of all of them when Adam's car broke. But other than that, you know, we want to get some tough drivers, and the old girl held her own and kept up with these cars that are super fast. That's what's so cool. I could not believe I was able to keep up with some of these guys. And, you know, we've done a lot to the car over the years to get it there. Small things. So, anyway, point is, we're going to go through the whole car. I'm going to show you exactly what it's like. I mean, full clutch kickers trim. We haven't even taken the rear tires off. So let's get into it. All right, so body-wise, it's a 1997 Mazda Miata, mostly stock body. Stock hood, stock fenders, doors. I do have a KVD kit, so this is a polyurethane kit. I love this kit. So it's immensely flexible. I mean, I've never broken it. You can see all the scrape marks from going into the trailer because it's low enough to where it just like catches and folds under the car. Doesn't care. I mean, it's probably done that 150 times and it just doesn't care. It's still in one piece. I've taken hits in the front. It's solid. It's nice to have a flexible kit. You don't even have to think about it. I mean, door taps, you can't, it's unbreakable in a sense. So I have the bumper and side skirts, but I did take off the rear bumper. I ran it for a while, but it's kind of stepped. It's like the front bumper and then the side skirts are a little lower, then the rear bumper was even lower than that. And with the way I run the car and how much it squats down, the bumper would just drag the ground. And I wasn't a huge fan of the way it looked in general. So I ended up taking it off and switching to just a rear bash bar. So I have a True Focus Fab rear bash bar. I think it looks good on there, and it is super functional in the sense that we got a jack point that's super easy to get to. Don't have to get the car up on ramps to get under the bumper. Can easily crouch down here and at least take a quick look at suspension stuff and make sure everything's tight, nothing's falling off, nothing's bent, broken, etc. It just makes working on the car significantly easier, which functionality is always kind of number one with this car. So stock trunk, things like that. It does have a Treasure Coast hardtop, which is a little wider than the stock one. I mainly used it to get the extra clearance on the cage and get the cage a little bit higher. I do have fiberglass rear over fenders, but it's not all cut out under here. It's just cut out in the arch to gain the wheel clearance. And then I have cut out doors. So this one's a little messed up. I had it on for one round and it got kind of destroyed. But basically It's just cut right above the NASCAR bar here because the bar does go out to the door bar there. It still has a handle and the lock, and I can actually lock it with a key. I can also put windows in it. You might have noticed that earlier. So what I did here was I cut the track short. I welded a little stop in it for the rear roller here. So then you just pop it into the A-pillar window, slide it down, and then that roller goes into the track and it stops. Basically, you can just put the windows in all the way up. And that's just nice because, you know, sometimes at the track it starts raining and you don't have the car that well covered. It helps keep some of the water out. Good compromise with the NASCAR bars because you can't have a window that rolls up and down because the cage would get in the way. All right, so as far as the interior goes, I've still got full carpet. Most of the interior, there's no HVAC stuff, but it just makes the car a lot more comfortable when you have carpet. It just keeps a lot of the heat out. When you have just a basic floor pan, no carpet, that heat soaks through so quick. So, and it's not really a big weight savings to take it out anyway. So we don't have any of the turn signal stuff, just the bare steering column with an adapter, quick release. This is my first place clutch kickers wheel. I just put this on. I had the second place one on here for a long time. So I've got the Holley digital dash with the LRB speed panel to mount it. I do have a separate oil temp gauge, just kind of like as its own standalone thing, but the Holley will tell me pretty much everything I need to know. Still has a working cigarette lighter though, so that's pretty nifty if I need to charge anything. So we have a real bride seat and a fake bride seat. Bride seats are really the only seats that I've ever worked to get me low enough in this car. Finally stepped up to just getting a nice real one, and it gets me low enough even with the padding in it. So this is definitely a worthwhile upgrade. It is far nicer than the fake ones I've had before. So the dash has this carbon fiber trim piece. A viewer sent this to me a long time ago, and it really does spiff up the interior. Another viewer, built by Hutch, 3D printed me these cool dash vents with my old logo on them. So this is a 1.6 dash. This is not what would normally come in this car. Normally it would have a 1.8 dash, which would have an airbag. So it's just a much bigger, thicker dash because it had to house that airbag. So the 1.6 is a nice upgrade. It's a lot cleaner, a lot sleeker, especially if you're not going to keep the airbag anyway. And then just the 1.6 tombstone with the vents and everything. We've got my chill out controller here for the cool shirt setup. And then I have a full PDM setup in this car. So it's basically its own, like a little computer. So instead of physical fuses and relays to trigger everything and deal with shorts and stuff, it's all solid state controlled. So we can do a lot of cool things with this. So I've got it programmed to where the ECU does everything. I turn the ignition on, I start the engine, and everything else is automatic besides things like headlights, but I don't have to turn my fans on or anything like that. I do have the option to turn my fans on if I want to. I can kind of override that, but otherwise everything's automatic, and that's the way I like it. I don't like getting in and having to press all these buttons. It feels cool the first couple times, but it gets old. We got interior lights, you know, important upgrade there. So we've got a GK Tech shifter, and then this just this universal shift boot that never wants to stay attached very well. There's a aluminum plate under here that this mounts to. So I built this essentially remote mounted hydraulic handbrake. So instead of trying to package everything here, which is a tight fit, we've got the handle and then a rod going back to the master cylinder, which bolts by itself back here. So I've had this set up in the car for a long time. I've gone through a bunch of handles. A viewer turned this on his lathe and sent it to me, and I just welded a bottom to it in the tabs. So I really like this setup. It just keeps you from having to dig your leg into a master cylinder over here. We got our fake bride over here. We do also have Crow Enterprise harnesses. So I got these a long time ago and I was pretty blown away. These are by far my favorite harnesses I've ever ran. Usually harnesses are really thick and they're super rigid. They don't have any flexibility to them. Whereas these are like just like a t-shirt, you know, you can just fold them and scrunch them. It just makes them very comfortable. They kind of contour to your body instead of being this rock hard thing that doesn't have any give to it. So I really like these. These have definitely gotten very weathered in this car, even with the windows in. If it's a heavy rainstorm, rain's getting in. It doesn't seal up very well. So there's been a decent bit of water in this thing from time to time. And then we have the rear shelf area. So that's where the chill out unit goes. And then this is the water hoses and the wiring and stuff for that. I have it out right now because I'm going to be working on some ducting for that, but we've got carpet and insulation up there as well. You can kind of see the cover for my dry sump line, so they run through this metal housing here up into the engine bay. We'll get into that when we get into the trunk. And then of course we have a fire extinguisher. Very important to have in a drift car. And that's about it. So we'll go into the trunk. This is probably, besides the engine bay, the busiest area of the car. There's a lot going on back here. So we have a remote mounted kill switch. I didn't want to have to run wires all the way up and drill a hole and mount a big kill switch externally, but you need an external kill switch to pass tech a lot of places. So I had the idea to use a pull cable and a bracket and a switch. And my buddy AJ from Bell Raceworks quickly designed this little bracket to mount this big ka-chunk switch. And now we've got it from the outside. We can turn it on and off. Pretty handy. So he actually does sell these now as a kit. Become a pretty popular item for him. So I've got a really big battery back here. Building this car, weight was not a factor in my head. I thought it's a Miata, it'll be light enough. I don't need to do lightweight things. I was definitely wrong about that. But you know, certain things, I'd rather have the weight than have the headache. So instead of running some super small battery that needs a special charger, or just a battery that's a little too small and having to worry about, you know, killing it when the system's at full draw and not being able to start the car, having to jump it, I didn't want to deal with any of that. So we've got a big old AGM battery. It's just a parts store brand. We've got just a battery tray that I built. Then we have the dry sump system. So a lot of people think that because this car has a dry sump that makes it some crazy high-level car. It's really not. You'll see when we get to kind of the engine details, it's just, I guess I'm one of the few people that's willing to put a dry sump on an engine that's not a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 engine. For me, it's reliability is like, I'll spend money on reliability before anything else. Before another 30 horsepower, this or that, reliability is key. So it's not a super crazy system either. It's not like a 5-stage. It's just a 2 scavenge, 1 pressure stage. Pretty much the most basic of dry sumps. But I put this in right after that first motor blew up because LS has suffered from oil starvation. I did not want to go through that again. I didn't want to blow up another motor. To me, it was worth the $3,000 to ensure that that motor was going to blow up, even though that motor was worth less than the dry sump system. So anyway, this is the tank. So you've got your return line and your feed line going to the engine. This is the breather line from the valve cover, and then this is the breather from the tank to the breather tank. So then it's just mounted on this simple plate setup I made. You can see my handbrake lines there. They come back, tee off to each side. And then we have a pretty crazy fuel system for this car. Considering the power level, we are on E85, but we could get away with like 1 pump in the tank. But for some reason, I just had fuel slosh issues with this car. It got to a point where from a full tank, if I had used 3 gallons, the car would fuel cut. You know, you'd start sliding, the fuel would slosh around, the car would fuel cut. And it was an annoyance. So I had this surge tank, this Deechwork surge tank for another car that I never ended up using it on. So I went ahead and tossed this in here. So basically our in-tank pump fills this up, and then we've got 2 pumps in here that pump out to the engine. So it's kind of like a capacitor. You know, this would last like 2 full runs without the in-tank pump pumping at all. So it eliminates fuel slosh. Now I can run the tank all the way down to empty without having any sort of fuel cut. So we've got a filter on the way into the surge tank from the in-tank, and then we have a PTFE line running through another filter, and then PTFE all the way up to the engine. And that's because E85 will break down the rubber lines, and we do still have rubber lines in the system, but the fuel then goes through a filter, and it's all PTFE all the way up to the injectors. So that way, if there is any rubber that gets broken down by the E85, it'll get caught in the filter, and then the E85 won't break down the Teflon AN line. So again, pretty elaborate fuel system for what we're doing here, the engine and stuff. But again, reliability, you know, having fuel issues, having fuel cut, fuel slosh, worrying about stuff like that, junking up injectors. It's just try to make this thing as bulletproof as possible. So that is the trunk. Like I said, it's a busy boy back here. There's a lot going on, but as you can see, all stock floor pans. Nothing's been cut out back here. Just a you know, stock Miata trunk with a lot of junk in it. All right, so under the hood, obviously it's an LS. This is the 3rd engine in this car, actually. The first engine blew up, first drift event. Second engine is still living happily ever after in the RX-7. It was a 5.3 aluminum block with a basic cam setup. I got to a point competing at clutch kickers where I wanted a little more power, so I put the 6.2 liter in it. This is an L92, so it's a truck engine. This came out of an '07 Escalade specifically. So it's a 6.2 liter aluminum block, very similar to an LS3. It's essentially the truck version of an LS3. So you have to do some stuff to kind of convert it to work in a car. You got to delete the variable cam timing. If it came with displacement on demand, you want to delete that. And then we've done some top end reliability stuff like a brass trunnion upgrade to the rocker arms, and then valve springs and retainers to go with the larger Texas Speed Stage 3 cam. But really, other than that stuff, it's pretty much just a bone stock junkyard motor with an LS3 intake. So we have Deechworks fuel rails, Deechworks lines, Deechworks injectors, Deechworks regulator, and then pumps and surge tank in the back. The whole fuel system on this car is Deechworks stuff. I've had super good luck with their stuff. Pretty much anything I own that needs a bigger fuel system has Deechworks stuff. So we are drive-by cable on this car. It was drive-by-wire when I first put this engine in, and for a while, but we just recently started having some reliability issues with the drive-by-wire, getting errors and things like that. And again, for me, simplicity and reliability always trumps performance or looks or whatever. So as much as I really liked the way the drive-by-wire setup drove, I wasn't really using any of the advantages of it, so we just went back to drive-by cable, keep it simple. It's got a C6 Corvette intake, so it's a nice way to kind of clear through the hood, and then has a nice big filter down there. We've got an expansion tank that I built because to fit the engine in here, you have to move the radiator under the core support, which puts it too low for you to properly bleed the cooling system. As you can see, it's lower than the outlet on the water pump. So basically this just acts as an expansion of the cooling system so I can fill from here and bleed all the air out. And then this is a built-in overflow. So this is pressurized, this isn't. This is when the cap opens, it overflows into here. So this was my very first aluminum TIG project. Not the nicest thing, but I mean, it's been in there for a while. I did blow it open once, sending it a little too hard at the old Freedom Factory, and had to weld it back together. But other than that, she's been good to me. That is one piece that I would like to redo on this car sometime soon. It's lived its life. It could stand to be retired at this point. So we've got our remote mounted filter housing here. You can see our dry sump lines coming in from the tank. Our dry sump pumps down there. I can show you that a little better once we get the car on the lift. We have these Mishimoto race fans. These things are absolute units, man. They pull so much air. This car runs so cool. Like, it is one of the coolest running drift cars I know of. I never ever have to worry about temps with this thing. Can hot lap it, thrash on it, super hot day, it doesn't care. So as you can see, we have a pretty simple accessory drive. We just have our crank pulley, which is an ATI damper, water pump, tensioner, and alternator. Used to run power steering on this car. I fought tooth and nail to keep power steering. I went through multiple different styles. I went through the normal style, GM power steering pump, went to an electric pump mounted in the trunk, went to an electric column, which was absolutely horrible. It was not ideal for drifting. I tried it all, and I just couldn't find a reliable system that worked well. I kept burning out pumps and having issues, and it would happen, of course, right at a comp, and it was a headache. So I ended up taking the power steering out entirely, and I just run no power steering on the car. It's a little bit harder to drive than it would be with power steering, but again, simplicity, reliability, it's one entire system gone off the car that can fail. Power steering issues are super common on drift cars. You see people struggle with it all the time, no matter what engine, no matter what pump. It's always something that becomes an issue because you're steering lock to lock. The power steering is doing a lot. There's a lot of load, high RPM. It's all things that a power steering pump probably isn't too fond of. So to be able to run completely without it just makes everything so much simpler and more reliable. So I've been running without it for at least a year or two now, and I definitely wouldn't go back. So that pretty much wraps us up as far as the engine bay is concerned, which is pretty much everything I can show you from up top. So to get to the rest, we're gonna have to put the old girl on the lift and show you underneath. So let's get these two switched around here. All right, got this thing on the lift. Let's lift it all the way up and check out what's underneath. So this is what 3 years of thrashing and abuse looks like. Even with parts coming and going, this poor thing has it's lived a hard life. Let's just say that. It definitely needs to be gone through here soon. Needs a little R&R. But we'll continue on with the engine. So you can see our dry sump pan. So it's completely flat front to bottom because the oil is not stored in the pan. It's sucked out by our dry sump pump here with our scavenge lines, pumped to and from the tank, and then pumps out of this pressure fitting, goes through our oil cooler, into our filter, and then into our engine. We also now have long tube headers on this car, and these made a huge difference in and of themselves. when I first put the 6.2 in, I ran the exhaust I had on the 5.3, which the 5.3 is pretty healthy for what it was. It made 350 wheel on E85 with a really basic cam and spring combo. And the setup I had was these cast iron G8 manifolds, which is what the swap kit was kind of designed around, and then a dual 2.5 to single 3-inch exhaust. So while that was fine for the 5.3, when I put the 6.2 in, it really was kind of underwhelming. I expected a lot more low-end torque, a lot more power overall. I mean, it's a bigger displacement engine running a much bigger cam, way better heads, and a way better intake manifold. It didn't feel like it picked up that much. Well, the exhaust was choking it out. Now that we had all those better things, we were bringing in way more air, but we weren't able to let that much air out. Not only that, but the car used to run really cool with the 5.3. When I put the 6.2 in, it ran a solid 20 to 30 degrees hotter than it had ever ran before, and same for same circumstances. So we put the long tube headers on. I didn't dyno it before the long tube headers, so I don't know the exact power gains, but it felt like a bigger jump. Going from the old exhaust to the long tubes and new exhaust, it felt like a whole entirely different animal. Way more power down low, way more mid-range obviously, way more top end, more power everywhere. But to my surprise, not only did we gain power, but it ran 20 to 30 degrees cooler everywhere. Idle, in drift, it didn't matter, 20 to 30 degrees cooler. I was worried it was gonna run hotter because I'm like, the G8 manifolds are gonna contain more of that heat, keep from heat soaking the engine bay, but it was the total opposite. The engine was so choked out with the old exhaust that it just generated so much more heat. So the long tubes are definitely probably one of the best things I did on this car. Now, there wasn't an off-the-shelf kit, so these are custom built by my buddy Tim at Salvage to Savage. I normally do all my own fab work, but this was one of those projects I just didn't want to tackle. I'll be honest. I knew he would do a much better job at it than I could. And this car, I just want it to work. So I had him do it, and he really wanted to do a full titanium exhaust, so he built this dual 3-inch titanium exhaust, which, you know, it was honestly worth going titanium just for the sound. You would think that I'm running a titanium exhaust, it's all about weight savings. I promise you that wasn't even a factor. It's just, I just wanted it to sound cool, and it does sound pretty sweet. The titanium, it has less of like that hollow, tinny sound than stainless does. So that's pretty much it for the engine. As far as the transmission goes, we were using a Nissan 350 Z-Trans, commonly referred to as a CD009. That's actually what this is. There's a few different variations. So to make it work with our LS, we have a Collins adapter kit, which mates it to a T56 bell housing, which bolts to our LS. For a clutch, we have just a full monster clutch kit with the right center splines for the Z-Trans. And I really love this combination. I mean, a lot of people at this power level and competitive level run dog boxes, and I mean, it would be nice to have, but I mean, I've had pretty good luck with these transmissions. They've held up really well. This is the second one, but it's actually the first one. I had issues with this one going into fifth when I put the car together the first time. So when we went to V2, because I blew the first motor up, I got another one and found out that you need to shave the selector rod down sometimes to not hit the adapter plate. Otherwise it won't go into fifth. So I did that on the new trans. It started just getting a little rough to shift. So I put this one back in, shaved the selector rod down. What do you know? Fifth gear works now, and this one shifts a lot better than the one I've been beating on for 2-3 years now. So really not bad for a couple of just straight up junkyard transmissions. I mean, these are unopened, didn't modify them, didn't do anything to them. All we did was put a GK Tech shifter on it, which just allows the shifter to be moved forward to fit in the hole. Otherwise, it would be like way back here. We've got a drive shaft just from a local drive shaft shop. And for the differential, we have a Ford 8.8. This is out of like a 90s Thunderbird. So I got this for 40 bucks. It is a big, beefy unit. This is like the biggest IRF differential I've ever dealt with. It's bone stock, just welded. For mounts, we have the Monster Miata mount kit. I did kind of redesign the diff mount itself here because I had some issues with the stock mount and ended up breaking the rear cover, which is why we now have an aftermarket rear cover. But otherwise, it's pretty much just the Monster Miata mount kit, and I went ahead and stitch welded the subframe. For axles, we have the Monster Miata conversion axles, so I built these myself. You actually basically just used a stock parts store axle and put the Monster Miata shafts and boots in it, and then you have conversion hubs to accept the outer splines. So pretty simple setup, obviously very, very beefy differential for a Miata, and that was kind of the point in the build philosophy of this car when I decided to do a Miata. Is it is a relatively small car, relatively light, like I said, this one's kind of heavy, but with a really small wheel and tire combo. This 15-inch wheel with this 225 tire is probably half the weight of an 18 with a big tire on it. and that's a lot less rotational mass and strain on the drivetrain. So the thought was, have a drivetrain that could handle 500, 600, 700 horsepower in a bigger car with a bigger tire, put it in a smaller car with a smaller tire, and this stuff should in theory last forever. Now, we did break an axle at the last round, so I've got my spare in there now, but overall, this setup's done me pretty well for being, just a basic junkyard welded diff. So that's pretty much it for the drivetrain. Last stop on the tour here is going to be suspension stuff. We have pretty much all destroyer die. That's really the star of the show here. Oh, let's go this way. We're touching the bumper. So we have their drop knuckles, upper control arms, and lower control arms. This setup is freaking bulletproof, man. I absolutely love it. It drives great. It's not overcomplicated with all these heim joints and a million different adjustments. It's simple and it just works. We use poly bushings, the stock eccentrics. We've got camber adjustment between the upper and lower arm just by sliding one or the other out. We can slide them both out and adjust our track width. Nice laser cut steel knuckle. Everything's just super simple, super stout. It drives really, really well, and you don't have to worry about breaking stuff. I mean, this car has taken hits. I've door tapped people a million times. I've only ever bent one suspension component, and it was my upper control arm. And I think it was just a freak thing where the wheel caught it, snagged it, and like bent it up. Other than that, this stuff, again, has been bulletproof. I hate saying these things because, a little superstitious in that department, but I have really, really loved the destroyer die stuff. Again, it's simple and it works. Rear suspension wise, we have pretty much all destroyer die stuff as well. We do have the stock lower control arms still, but otherwise it's all destroyer die. So we've got their adjustable upper arms, which these are awesome. No heim joints either, still poly bushings, but you have an eccentric bolt at the knuckle. So if we want to adjust camber at the track, which a lot of times you kind of got to change camber from track to track, we can just turn that eccentric bolt. It doesn't change toe or anything. We can just adjust camber on the fly, super easy. Don't have to unbolt a heim joint and twist it out and measure it. We just, boom, turn the eccentric. I love it. And then we have their rear drop knuckles. So these are, laser cut steel drop knuckle with built-in dual caliper brackets. So they're basically built to be a dual caliper knuckle. So basically just all off-the-shelf stuff, all pretty simple stuff. The only secret sauce, I guess you could say, on the car is the rear coilovers. So I used to work for BC Racing, and I have gone through and made changes to the rear coilovers a handful of times to try to get them dialed in and really just kind of get the most grip out of the car as I can. So I went through, I think, 4 different shock lengths because, if you want more shock stroke, shock travel, you've got to deal with a longer body. But the longer that is, the higher the car is going to sit, the less drop range you'll have. And then same with springs. If you run too short of a spring, it won't have enough travel. So just trying to maximize it. I used helper springs, no helper springs, different spring rates. I messed around a lot with the rear suspension before I got to a point where I was really happy with it and felt like I was kind of maxing it out. And that is something you can 100% order from BC. It's just not the default spec, right? It's been customized a little bit. And that is one area where I put a lot of time into the setup. But otherwise, the car's setup is just what you would expect a setup to be. It's about no camber. It's got some toe in the rear. It's got a tiny bit of toe out in the front, 6-7 degrees of caster, and 5 degrees of negative camber. That's pretty much it. Man, I think that's about it. Kind of gone through a lot. I know it's a pretty detailed list, but I wanted to kind of break it all down to everything that's on the car. And that is everything I can think of. So now that we're done going over the parts list, let's drop this thing down and put it on the scales. I'm really excited to weigh it. I haven't weighed it in a couple of years. It's been a long time, so I'm really not sure. I know what it weighed before, and I know most of the changes that have been made since then, both more weight and less weight, but I don't know what it weighs now. I'm curious. Before we do that, though, we'll talk about power numbers. So right now, it makes 480 wheel horsepower. I don't remember what the peak torque is, but we just dynoed it a week ago. It is making a little more power now than it was at Klutch Kickers. It was down about 40 horsepower in the mid-range. The map was really rich in the mid-range, and then about 20, 25 horsepower everywhere else. We did get some of that back, but we're still about 15 down from when the car was dynoed originally. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's enough power. It's just we kind of are on the ragged edge with this thing power-wise because we're running these Nitto NTO1 tires. These things, being a very small tire, a 225, 45, 15, they pack a big punch. And I think a lot of people, when they think about the fact that this car runs such a small tire, they think about it in width, like a 225 versus someone else running a 285. But diameter also gives you surface area, right? Like the larger the diameter, the more contact patch you have front to back. So we are running a much smaller contact patch, but these tires, man, they make up for it, and they put in work. I am so stoked on these tires. These tires were really like that last bit of oomph we needed to keep up with the pro cars and really put it on their door in battle. So, okay, that was a whole lot of jibber-jabbering. Speaking of, we have jibber-jabber shirts finally. This has been a long requested item. Finally got them made. They're pocket tees. I also have the original twist on the original garage built tee design as well. So both of those are on the site and in stock now. So for anyone who's been asking about both of those shirt designs, you can order them, garagebuiltco.com. I'll put the link down below if you're interested. But we finally have them. It took a while, just like getting anything else. Merch, I think it took like a month and a half to get them in, but we got them. We got a decent bit. So if you want one, check it out. But let's finish this off. Let's drop this thing down and weigh it while it starts raining. All right, got our scale zeroed. Let's drop her down and see what we got. Oh, hold on. Got a wire. Sure the legs are fully off. What do we got? 2490. Dang, we're down. The last time I weighed it, it was 2536. So we're under 2,500 pounds now. That's really not bad. 51% cross. Let's go to partial percentage. Oh, 53.8% front. So we have a little bit better front to rear bias than we did before. It was 54.5, I think, before. So we got 1,342 pounds on the nose, 1,148 on the rear. And our right front is 50 pounds heavier than our left front, which is good because I'm on the left side. You know what, I'm gonna put the camera on this and see what our percentages are with me in it, just for my own curiosity. We are missing the chill out system, our cool shirt deal. It's only about 10 pounds, so not a huge difference. All right, well, I guess that's pretty much it. Pretty stoked. It's actually under 2,500 pounds now. That's exciting. So there is more I want to do to this car. Let's say version 3 update. I want to cut some weight just because the car can be lighter. And I don't think it would take a whole ton to make it lighter. I might simplify the interior some. I definitely want to clean it up, repaint it, you know, new body panels, but all that major stuff is definitely going to wait until after the season. We've got 2 rounds of Klutch Kickers left, which is the main thing. And then once that's done, I think I'm going to tear into the car and just give the old girl a much needed refresh. I meant to do it before this season, and I got too busy building the Zafiro. It needs some love. It really does. I mean, we've got bushings that are like tearing apart, and it needs some love. But for now, got to make it through 2 more rounds plus whatever other comps pop up in between. So yeah, that is the LS Miata build overview, build breakdown, whatever you want to call it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of the car. If there was anything that you didn't know it had that you're surprised about, whatever. Just leave a comment down below. But for now, that's about all we got. Enjoy this rainy afternoon and end it here. So thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye, guys.